Welcome to the lesson 4 of GRE Prep coursework on how to crack the analytical writing section. In this lecture, we will discuss steps to take to write a clear and coherent essay in the limited amount of time provided. We will also discuss the scoring system ETS graders use to evaluate your essays and the distinctions between the two types of essays. The analytical writing section of the GRE requires you to write two essays. One will be an analysis of an issue, and the other will be an analysis of an argument. You will have 30 minutes for each of these essays. Regarding scoring of the essays, your essays are read and scored by part-time employees of the ETS who are college TAs, teaching assistants, and they give you a score from 1 to 6 on both your essays, 6 being the highest. The average time that a grader spends is not more than 2 minutes on one essay, and some essays are graded in less than a minute. And so, since they are reading many GRE essays in a day, they don't have time to focus on small things, and therefore you also shouldn't. You should focus on the big picture. And what they consider are the following points. They see if you have considered complexities, if you can follow instructions of the prompt, if you have the ability to effectively organize and develop your ideas, if you can support your views with relevant examples, and if you have used the elements of written language wisely. Now, all the high-scoring essays have one thing in common: the length. An ideal essay should range from 400 to 700 words with 4 indented paragraphs. And by length, I don't mean you keep writing the same thing over and over again. I don't like writing essays. I don't like writing essays and keep repeating that. Your content of the essay should be meaningful. The relevant examples should support your views, and the more examples the better. And basically your essay should make sense. It should be in an organized way, and it should not feel like superficial list of bulleted points. It should feel like a thoughtful piece of writing. 30 minutes is not a lot of time to write an essay, so you'll need to have a pretty good idea of how you're going to attack them as soon as you sit down at the computer. So use the following approach to methodically write an essay. First is to think. Before you start writing, you take a moment to brainstorm some thoughts and ideas about the topic. You include relevant examples that will support your views. And since you're given a scratch paper, you can write all this down. The second is to organize. You take the ideas that you have listed and you fit them into the assignment for the prompt. You organize it in such a way that it sounds logical and methodical. And once you've completed the first 2 steps, the final step should be easy. Final step is writing. So make sure you spend some time planning your essay before you start writing. You have to figure this out first, otherwise you run the risk of writing an incoherent and rambling essay. And I believe the first 2 steps are actually more important to a successful GRE essay than the final step, because by spending a little time planning your essay, the actual writing part should be relatively painless. So what is it that you should be thinking about? There are 3 things. First is key terms. You're looking for key terms in the prompt, and you're looking if they need to be clarified or if there are multiple ways of interpreting those words. Since you need your essay to be as focused as possible, you need to take a stand and limit the key terms to one definition or interpretation. Otherwise, your essay will be a mess. So even if the key terms are straightforward, you still make a note of them. The second is opposite side. Now, ETS wants you to consider both sides of the prompt, and if you want to score well on the essay. And it's looking for more than you just saying that I agree with this statement and here's why, or I disagree with this statement and here's why. What they're looking for is that you have considered both the positions or the sides of the issue, and then you defend your position. So you take a moment and think about the converse of the statement given in the question, and you think about the pros and cons of this issue. And lastly, you have to think about examples, and those examples have to be relevant. The instructions for the question clearly states that you should support your position with examples drawn from your reading, experience, observation, and academic studies. Now, I think the most important part of an issue or any essay is the examples. Your examples have to support your position, and you cannot expect to achieve a high score on an issue without examples. And make sure you have examples listed from both sides of the issue. So that will better back your essay up. And when you think about examples, you try not to think about personal experiences. Try to think about examples from history, literature, or current events. They are much better than personal observations or experiences. So these are the steps you need to take before you proceed on to the next step, that is organize. The first step in organization is to separate your examples. You separate the examples that support the pro side from those that support the con side. Even though you might have a strong preference for one position, you might notice that the examples that you have listed tends to support the other side of the issue. So now there's no right or wrong answer to the issue. It's all about the examples. Whichever side has more examples, you can pick that and make it your thesis statement. A thesis statement is basically the main point that you want to express in your essay. So once you've listed the examples, once you have the thesis statement, now you can begin to write. When it comes to writing, the essay readers are looking for 4 characteristics as they go through your essay in less than 2 minutes. According to ETS, an outstanding essay considers the complexities of the issue, is clearly organized, it supports your views with relevant examples, and it uses the elements of English language. So basically, they're looking for good organization and supporting examples for what position you have taken, and reasonably good use of the English language. A basic essay has 3 parts: an introduction that will introduce the topic of the essay, it discusses the issues around it, and it presents the thesis of the essay, the main point that you want to convey. Secondly, it has body paragraphs that use examples to support the thesis of the essay. And finally, it has a conclusion that should summarize the major points of the issue, reiterate the thesis, and perhaps consider its implications. Now, these 3 things are exactly what ETS wants to see in your analysis of an issue essay. And if you try to think of each paragraph as having a specific job to do, you can pretty much reconstruct each type of paragraph and then fill in the specific details on test day, even if you don't know what question you're going to get. Once you have an idea of what each paragraph will convey, it becomes much simpler on the test day to fill in the specific details regarding that question. Now let's talk about introduction in a little bit more detail. A good introduction for an essay should clearly establish the topic of the essay. It should preview both sides of the issue in question, and it should present a clear thesis. Now, we want the reader to know from the introduction what the essay is about. Even though the grader knows what the prompt is, what you're writing about, it should still be clear from the introduction of your essay what they're reading about. So there are a few different ways by which you can quickly establish the topic, and some of them are listed here. You can begin your essay with a famous quotation. For example, a common saying is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Or you can give an anecdote where you say, the romantic poet so and so was so struck by the beauty of so and so that he wrote a poem about it. Or it can start with a fact or a statistic. A recent scientific study showed that, then you give something. Or you define a major term of the issue. Or you started with a rhetorical question. You question what is given in the issue. You present it as a question as the first sentence of the issue. So once you've established the topic, then you preview the issue. So basically, once you've told what the topic is, you inform the readers of the issues at hand, and you briefly touch upon both sides of the debate, explaining the pros and cons of the prompt. And it's a very good idea to use trigger words here, like despite, although, while. So the trigger words that we had discussed before, you can use those here. And you should practice beforehand writing sentences that address both sides of the issue. And finally, you present the thesis, which is the final task in the introduction section. So you can use words like I believe, or I feel, or in my view, or after weighing the evidence. So even if you use I in the essay, there's no penalty or negative marking for that. The only purpose of writing your thesis is giving the reader some indication why you hold your particular position, and they want to see how you've thought about it, how you have analyzed it. So basically, you should try writing thesis statements for different examples before you go on the test day and attempt the issue question. So make sure you practice writing all these sentences, the previews, the introductions, and presenting the thesis. That will give you, confidence when you attempt the question on the test day. Next come the body paragraphs. The best way to write an essay like this is to use strong topic sentences with good transitions for each of the body paragraphs. What the topic sentence is doing is it's serving as a gentle reminder to the reader of what the thesis is about. Once you have a topic sentence, then you back it up with examples. And when it comes to examples, you're not just listing examples. What you're doing is you're developing and supporting a position on the issue. So don't get caught up in, giving too many details about the examples without mentioning why the example is relevant or how is it supporting your thesis. So your purpose is to clarify to the reader that your examples are well thought of and how they are supporting the topic sentence. And make sure that the transitions between each of the body paragraphs is smooth. It should not be abrupt. So that's the best way to approach writing the body of the issue. And finally, you end your essay with a conclusion. A good conclusion indicates good organizational skills. It tells the reader that you thought about what points you wanted to make, you made them, and now you're ending the essay. Also, an essay without a conclusion seems incomplete. It seems almost as if your writing abruptly ended. So you don't want that to happen. A good conclusion will alert the reader that the essay is ending. Conclusion paragraphs have their own topic and transition sentences. and they contain a word or a phrase that tells the reader that the essay is coming to an end. These words and phrases can be in conclusion, ultimately, clearly, or the bulk of the evidence shows that. So these are some words that you can use to alert the reader that the essay is coming to an end. Secondly, it summarizes the main points of the essay, meaning that it mentions the thesis, how the examples support it. One optional thing that you can add is how you have considered the implication of the thesis, but that's not necessary, that's only optional. Now, the timeline that you should follow while drafting an issue is that you should spend 5 to 7 minutes in finding key terms, stating the opposite side, and brainstorming examples. Then you spend 2 minutes formulating a thesis. And then you spend 18 to 20 minutes writing the actual essay, and 1 to 2 minutes on proofreading. So, see, there is not a lot of time allotted for proofreading, and it's okay to have minor spelling and grammatical errors. It's more important that you spend time writing an effective essay with relevant examples rather than, looking for all the typos that you've done. The graders also understand that there is a time constraint and it's not possible to accomplish everything, including proofreading. So minor errors are okay to do. So next is how to approach an argument. The argument essay of the GRE asks you to examine and critique the logic of an argument. So we'll discuss what the different parts of an argument are, how to break it down, and how to approach writing it. Now, the different parts of the argument are the conclusion, which is the author's opinion and recommendation for action. So if you see words like therefore, hence, clearly, as a result, showed that, you can be sure that you found the conclusion of the argument. The next is the premises. These are the facts the author uses to back up his or her opinion. So there are certain words that indicate premises, such as because, in view of, or in light of, assume, since, given that. So these are words that indicate a premise. And finally, the third is assumptions. Assumption is an unstated premise that supports the author's conclusion. So it's a connection between the premises, the stated premises, and the conclusion. And these are facts that are not stated in the argument, but they must be true in order for the argument to make sense. So let me explain this with the help of an example. John's car broke down and he needs a car to get to work. Hence, he should buy a new car. So in this sentence, the premises are that John's car broke down yesterday and he needs a car to get to work. And the conclusion is that he should buy a new car. Now, when you read this sentence, you might have some questions, such as, why can't John just rent a car? Or why can't John just fix the car? So, as you read the argument, you've identified the premises and the conclusions, and there are some questions that came up. Now, these questions are pointing out the gap that leads to the assumption. The gap is between a broken car and still needing a car to get to work. Now, the assumption is there is no other way to have a car. This is the assumption that should be true in order for this argument to be true. And it's these assumptions that you will find out. You'll find out the missing gaps, and that's what you will use as the supporting examples for your agreeing or disagreeing to an argument. Now, the steps to write an argument essay are: first, you read the topic and identify the conclusion and the premises. Second is you look for gaps and weaknesses in the logic and write them down. Since they're asking you to critique or weaken the argument, you have to concentrate on this point really hard. You brainstorm as many assumptions as you can think of and note them down on the scratch paper or on the computer screen. Then you select 3 to 4 of the strongest assumptions, and then you build and write your essay around it. Then you finally read and proofread. So basically, you don't need any prior knowledge of the topic. It's just logic. Once you can find the assumption or the missing gaps, then you can easily write an effective argument. And your job is to critique the argument, support it with examples, and suggest ways to strengthen it. Here's a template of an argument. You start with restating the argument in the first paragraph. Then you elaborate the link between the conclusion and the evidence in the second paragraph. You see if it's weak or strong. And in the third paragraph, you write at least 3 flaws in the reasoning that the author has given. The fourth paragraph is about how these flaws can be corrected to strengthen the argument. And finally, you summarize and conclude that the argument is weak because of the reasons discussed. So that's example 1. Another example of a template would be the first paragraph would state the argument, and the next 3 paragraphs would write about each flaw and elaborate how it can be corrected to strengthen the argument. And finally, the last paragraph should summarize and conclude that the argument is weak because of the reasons discussed. So you can use either of these templates or your own template, but make sure that your argument is logical and it flows well. Alright, so the timeline that you should follow in writing an argument is as follows. You spend 3 to 4 minutes in reading and understanding the argument. Then you spend another 3 to 4 minutes in thinking and writing about assumptions made by the author, at least 2 to 3 assumptions. Then you spend 18 to 20 minutes in writing the actual essay, and then 1 to 2 minutes for proofreading. Again, there's not a lot of time allotted for proofreading, so it's okay to have minor spelling and grammatical errors. Let's take a look at an example of an argument and how to identify different parts of the argument and how to come up with assumptions. So here's an announcement made by the International Health Foundation. A new medical test that allows the early detection of a disease will prevent the deaths of people all over the world who would otherwise suffer and die. The test is very effective in allowing doctors to diagnose the disease 6 months to a year before it would have been spotted by conventional means. As soon as we can institute this test as routine procedure in hospitals, the death rate from this disease will plummet. So what are the different parts of the argument? We have a conclusion, a premises, and assumptions. So what is the conclusion here? Well, the conclusion is in this argument comes in the first line highlighted in green. A new medical test that allows the early detection of a disease will prevent the deaths of people all over the world who would otherwise suffer and die. So that's a clear conclusion made by the author. Where is the premises of this argument? The premises, as you know, is the evidence in support of the conclusion. So that comes in the second line highlighted in blue. The test is very effective in allowing doctors to diagnose the disease 6 months to a year before it would have been spotted by conventional means. Now, let's think about some assumptions. Assumptions are the unspoken premises of the argument without which the argument would fall apart. Now, assumptions are often causal, analogical, or statistical. So what are some assumptions made here? Let's think. First of all, we do not know that early detection of the disease will necessarily lead to survival or not. We don't even know if the disease is curable. If it's an incurable disease, then early detection is not going to help save lives. Secondly, do we know if this test is affordable? If it's widely available? If it's expensive and available only in certain parts of the world, then people will still continue to die from the disease in other parts of the world. And thirdly, will the doctors and patients interpret the test correctly? Do we know that even if the test is fine, do we know the doctors will interpret the results fine, or if the patients will follow through the treatment? No, we don't. And if they don't do this, then the test will not be saving any lives. So in the final sentence, the author says death rate will plummet. Well, there's a huge gap here in that there's absolutely no explanation of how merely detecting the disease early on will immediately cause the death rate to plummet. So that's the major flaw in this argument. And those were some assumptions that the author has made. And you can now easily build upon an argument while discussing these three assumptions that we just talked about here. So that's an approach to follow while attempting a question on analysis of an argument. And with that, I am done here. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to write to me. And here's my email address. And thank you all for your attention and wish you all the best for the test.